This leads us into then our work with mindfulness. And we're going to take you to the next level of understanding what it is, how it works, and then we're going to do a practice session to implement the skill set. So mindfulness, as we shared last week, is the ability of us to, in the moment, be aware of what we're experiencing, one. Next, to be aware that we're here in this moment. So Peter knows he's talking to you. Right now you become aware that you're listening to me. And then finally, as we progress in the skill of mindfulness, in the moment of being here, we know what our body sensations are doing, what our feelings are doing, and what our thinking processes are doing. So we're tuned into those three dimensions. So awareness in the moment, knowing that we're here, and then what's happening subjectively in us. So I just use the term subjective. That means what's happening internally in here versus objective reality, which is out here. With mindfulness, we learn to passionately change what can and should be changed. We've got keeping our brain in optimal emotional intelligence to be able to be an effective advocate change agent. On the inside, regardless of what the chaos is out here, what we're trying to problem solve on that, on the inside, we learn to have a stillness. We learn to have a kind of an allowingness. The Beatles had a great line, "Let it be." But that's at the subjective level and the internal level. So that's what mindfulness is. So I'm just going to take you through a few more understandings and then get into sharing with you the 5 ways that mindfulness, in fact, really complements our presence as partners, parents, friends, adult kids, support professionals, leaders at all levels, and just show you how this works. Let's start with a little story. There was a military officer who was studying mindfulness in a class for PTSD. After one class, he went to the supermarket where it was very crowded with long lines. The woman carrying a child in front of him had just one item but would not get into the express line. The officer was impatient and began to get annoyed with her. It got worse when she got to the checkout stand. She and the clerk started cooing over the baby, and the woman then handed the child to the clerk. The officer began to tense up, his anger building at the thought of how selfish she was. But because he had just come from his mindfulness class, he noticed what he was doing to himself and began to breathe softly and relaxed. He even noticed the thought that this was a cute baby. By the time he got to the clerk, he had let go enough to say, "That was a cute little boy." "Oh, thank you," the clerk said. "That was my baby. You see, my husband was in the Air Force. He died last year in a plane crash. Now my mother takes care of my boy and brings him in once a day so I can see him." We judge each other so quickly, yet know so little about what the other carries in his or her heart. To truly awaken and be present, we must offer to all the same respect we would give to a great teacher. The angry, inconvenient, hurried, difficult folks around us can teach us this allowing and compassion, which is part of what comes out of your mindfulness practice. So throughout our training, then we teach you how to use difficult other people as grist for your patience mill. So it turns out that we have been born into this situation we call life with some great tools for surviving and reproducing. But these tools get in our way big time when we consider moving out of the basics of survival and reproduction, when we move into wanting to have a quality of life, when we're wanting to be able to ensure that it's personally satisfying and socially useful for us and for all others that we meet. And that's what the average person like yourselves is looking to do. both in your professional roles and in your personal roles. So I talked to you last week briefly about this, what I call PFP. So this, we've all inherited primitive predispositions from thousands and thousands of years of evolution, kept us into a way of surviving through the paleo plains and all of that, and brings us, we literally have all of these now. We talked about those a bit last week. The F in this PFP is talking about the filtering system, which we're going to look at this afternoon in terms of what we learned in that first family that we were raised in, and what did we take out of there in terms of some rules as to how to be in this subjective reality that we talked about. It turns out that we're inclined to put a very subjective spin on a lot of things that happen in the external world, depending on how we were raised and what social scientists call the nurtured us. The primitive predispositions is more the nature us. And then there's this thing called brain priming that leads into our cognitive biases and kind of some of the culture standards as to what we're supposed to be doing and the likes of that. So within that whole piece, we've inherited and learned a couple of really important things. So one is that this body, in order to survive, it exaggerates its feelings and experiences of physical and emotional pain. You've all had, something in your body, likely a back injury or a leg or whatever, and you notice that, there's certain pain there, but you go to a masseuse, say, and they will massage the area, and you'll walk out of there feeling, it feels a bit better. Well, they haven't touched the epicenter. They've just worked with the traumatized muscles around that. And that traumatized muscles are what we call resistance to the system. And that resistance is very helpful for us in terms of giving us the message, hey, stop doing what you're doing. Otherwise, in the old paleo days, you would end up starving because you could not move if you continued to injure your back or whatever. So it's very useful in terms of a survival skill. But this is when we start looking at having these personally satisfying and socially useful lives and contributing to the lives of other people, it works against us. In fact, one could say we're born to lose when it comes to looking at really being that, that higher self, if you would. Why is that? Well, it's because when we experience a chaotic situation out here, let's say a difficult person, a difficult situation, when we experience that, we get buildup of tightening in the tissue in our bodies. We get maybe a tight chest, and we get maybe sweaty palms. We get a gut that's rumbling. We get a lot of these kinds of things. And that starts to set off certain chemicals in us around freeze, fear, flight. And that's not what we need in certain situations. We don't need to be involved in a fight situation. We need to be our highest reconciling self to make things better here, to manage the problem, so to speak. But the body is saying, hey, fight or flee or freeze. So that's one part of the problem. The next part of the problem is the mind and emotional self has also learned to overreact. This is why we will be in a situation that is really, we've done the best we can to solve it, but we continue to worry. The thoughts can looping into our world. And that can take us also into a tendency to be less than patient, less than empathic, less than kind, because the emotional self is also set up to fight, to flee, to fear, whatever. So therein lies our problem. We've got this great tool that we need to survive. And even today, if we have an injury, we don't need to be messing around with it, making it worse. But each and every one of us are saddled with this situation of that tool that has helped us in one aspect, but is not now helping us. So when we talk about growing ourselves into mindfully emotional self-regulation, we look at a couple of the solutions, and the one that I teach is looking at PFP and learning how to regulate that whole system through the cognitive door, through understanding what our filters are, through reworking the filters and reframing them, and all some really great contributions that Western psychology has offered. We also, our second major way of dealing and bringing ourselves to not being automatically driven by this PFP situation of the tool we're talking about, is through the door of what we call mindfulness. So when we start to apply the skills that we learn in mindfulness, there's a couple of very significant things take place. And the most significant is that we grow our consciousness. So I put down 4 different levels of consciousness. Remember, I mentioned to you before that when we are unconscious, when I say unconscious, that's how you were last night when you slept. You didn't know what was happening. You couldn't do anything about what was happening. You were asleep. So in my riff, as I use the word unconscious, just know that's what I'm referring to. When I use the word semi-conscious, I'm referring to how we typically, what the culture would call normal consciousness. Remember last week I mentioned to you about how it's a typical example is how we drive our car. We are driving our car, but our mind is someplace else. We put the key in ignition and we end up in the parking lot. We are just not present to what's going on. The mind is usually fairly scattered. And I would suggest to you that is the human condition for the most part, that the average person goes pretty much to their grave being a victim of their 45,000 thoughts a day that we have. And both in our personal and professional worlds, we need to be able to do something more than that. So then we teach you how to increase what we're calling fuller consciousness, the third level of fuller consciousness, which is knowing what's happening in the moment that you're there. As I said to you before, it's really being more mindful. It's conscious of what's happening, conscious that I'm there, conscious of what's happening in my body sensation, my feeling and thinking states. So that's fuller consciousness. A touch of example of that is that example I gave where if a police officer came up behind us when we're driving, we would automatically have a higher level of consciousnness. We'd become aware of the speed, the line in the road, and all of it, and be aware that there's someone behind us. So that situation has raised our consciousness. But the problem is that we certainly don't want to have just external conditions bringing us to higher consciousness. We want to have that where we can literally do that on our own spontaneously. And so when we talk about learning mindfulness piece, which I'm going to take you through in a second, some of the benefits from it, I just want to make those 2 really important points, which sets up the big picture for appreciating what this particular skill can do. The first one is we do learn a skill. We learn a skill in learning how to, in the moment, bring ourselves into knowing what's happening. So when you're in your practice sessions, like we did last week, I brought you time and time again back when I said, if the mind drifts off, come back to being aware of your breath. Mind drifts off, come back to aware of your breath. Mind drifts off, come aware of being aware of image or talk thinking. And we just kept bringing you back. Well, as you practice, you start to really cultivate muscle memory, so to speak, in the brain. So it starts to just bring yourself back to where you want to be in terms of concentration. See, concentration is one of the first biggest skills we learn with mindfulness. We learn how to bring it back. And I would say this, a little bit prejudice here maybe, but I would say this, that your ability to focus your mind is near the very top of any gifts that you'll ever have in your life in terms of being able to bring yourself into higher ordered living. Just think of, concentration and focus. If you didn't have that, what you'd be missing in your life. And we're losing a lot of it because of, as I mentioned, the devices, addictions, where we're being concentrated, we're not concentrating. And so we're losing a lot of our ability to focus and concentrate. But we do learn that skill then to be able to, in the moment, catch ourselves, because we practice 10, 100, 1,000 times bringing ourselves back to the present moment that we're in when we do our formal practice. So that develops a skill set. And that skill set you're going to see as we unfold the tool of learning how to catch yourself in the moment. Like I mentioned earlier, be aware that you're listening to me. How to then calm yourself through the areas we're showing you, how to just calm this body. Your mind goes to catching myself being here, but also catching what's happening in my body. And I start to infuse that with that allowingness and tension that we talk about. Now that I've caught myself, calmed myself, now I can clarify the needs of this moment. Oh, am I starting into an emotional hijack? Are they into an emotional hijack? What are the needs of the moments so we can take care of objective reality? That's a part of the skill set that comes from being mindful. It's really a great skill. Now we can consciously connect with whoever we are with or whatever the situation is. So that's the catch, calm, clarify, and connect. So that's a skill set. The great news, though, is this, that as you practice more and more, you will develop, as I said, a form of muscle memory or neuroplasticity, whatever it is, where you just start being allowing, and the body just starts to be more inclined to just not tense up when you get into stressful situations. And this is really profound. This is an incredible, incredible gift. Because as we are in situations, and you know that the situations and the pains in life are not going to go away. That's the rules of this planet, where we're going to have pain and chaos and disruption. But as the saying goes, the pain is inevitable, the suffering is optional. Because this unconscious body-mind, when it tightens the way it is, it starts to put resistance into the system, and that's what causes a lot of our suffering. So through the mindfulness, you're going to learn how to work with the pain skillfully so that we don't have this tendency of the body to tighten and the yada mind to be into its worrying and all that, which creates the suffering. So, we've got this neat little form. We got pain, which happens inevitably, but times resistance equals a suffering. So if we can drop the resistance in that little formula, then we drop the suffering. And it's the suffering's the problem. The pain is you don't want the pain, but the problem is that, how we work with it, we suffer much more than we need to. So that's one of the promises that we give with mindfulness. So then we have this skill set, but we also have the spontaneous, natural way of being in the world, in the situation where we're not nearly as prone to get into the freeze, fear, or flight. And that's how a lot of the emotional self-regulation in our roles comes, that we just do this practice enough, and there's some part of the mind starts to embody as you bring yourself into formal practice, for maybe 5 hours, 10 hours, 20 hours. In this course, if you do the homework, you're going to end the course with about 20 hours practice. And the research on what happens at 20, 25 hours is outstanding. Dr. Richard Davidson from the University of Wisconsin put this out over 10 years ago, but you start to literally all day long have part of your parasympathetic system turned on. Yeah. Like you do 15 minutes in the morning, but after a cumulative 20, 25 hours, that system stays turned on, that system of being cooperative, being compassionate, being caring, all of that is turned on. So this is like the muscle memory I'm sharing with you. As you do this work, you just grow in this capacity. So you have the skills on one hand, but you have the capacity. So painful situations, chaos situations come up, and you're not as prone, nearly as prone. The nervous system's not prone to get involved in this freeze, fear, flight problem. So just to give a couple of specifics on where to go with this piece that we're talking about and to kind of summarize what the practice gives us. So the first one I share with you is that it's a reminder of being in prison. So the more mindfulness you get, you're going to be in your daily practices and you're going to find yourself saying, oh my gosh, I'm just being emotionally hijacked again. Remember last week we shared with you the prison of these thoughts that come into our minds, and asked you if you would ever share your thoughts you had yesterday with anybody. And of course, everyone says, no way, Well, that's because we're in a prison, and the mind does a lot of that radical thinking that's not even us. We've evolved to much higher levels than what the mind is. The mind plays this yada, 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 thoughts that would be too embarrassed to share. And that's not who we are. But if we're not mindful in the moment, those thoughts can become us. So when we are then mindful, reminds us that our mind has a mind of its own, and that when we are only semi-conscious, that the PFP is making many poor choices on our behalf. So that's the first help that we get from doing this. The second is we have awareness right now, in the moment, of more optimal responses. So the mindful me has a much greater likelihood of not being as semi-consciously driven to behave in accordance with this PFP programming, the initial thoughts and feelings directives. So the more conscious we become in the moment, we immediately rethink more optimal responses than initially offered by PFP. And that's that catch, calm, clarify process. That's incredible. I mean, we want ourselves to be optimal. We want our support professionals to, in these moments of stress, be able to be so present that they bring their A game, right? That's what we want. That's what we need to have. So you can catch yourself in the moment of starting to become emotionally hijacked, then start to look at the options. That's one of life's better deals. And this is the premier skill that can give us that, okay? So that's the catch, the calm, and the clarify. And as we move more into the course, you're going to get more detail on each of those steps on that. This third one, I don't know, I'm giving 5 here, but this may be the best of all. What happens as you do this work? Your live drive, that PFP us, it starts to get upgraded. We literally start to develop a 2.0 version of who we are, because we have been doing the work in terms of this being present, not being pulled into hijacks, and we literally start to reprogram this PFP piece. So, I mean, that counts for some of why we spontaneously start to become a better person. And we literally do become a better person because of it. So that's the summary on that. And then, as you noticed even a little bit last week, and you're going to notice each week we work together, that I took you into a place last week where you all agreed that through that little 10-minute exercise, you literally watched, a conscious you, watched thoughts arise and fall away, and feelings arise and fall away, and body sensations arise and fall away. You, the conscious you, actually watched that happen, which you proved to yourself then beyond any doubt that you're not your thoughts and your feelings. Unless you can stay conscious in the moment, you are pulled into those thoughts and you think they're you. And that's why you literally start behaving in ways that are less than your A game, because you don't even know you're having those thoughts, Einstein, who you've all heard of this guy, pretty bright guy, quote from him, he says, "A human being experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings as something separate from the rest of us, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. The striving for such achievement is in itself a part of the liberation and a foundation for inner security." That's Einstein, who we discredit with, E equals MC squares and all that, right? But we know that when we can observe our feelings and thoughts and body sensations arising and infuse them with this allowing, this intention, this equanimity we call it, or just subjective allowing, they do not drive and distort us nearly as much. They give us and inner peace. Because once again, we know that we're the consciousness that's observing them. And that is just a very, very powerful way to be, kind of in the moment of being with situations. And then number 5 on this is this wisdom and authentic compassion. We mentioned to you that as you do mindfulness practice, that you activate the medial prefrontal cortex. Remember we talked about last week with that train trolley exercise? That the medial prefrontal cortex, which is once again responsible for activating the parasympathetic system, but it's kindness, compassion, caring, connectedness. And every time you do a mindfulness practice, you grow neuron cells in that part of the brain. You literally grow neuron cells in that part of the brain. So many hours of doing this, they can actually see increased cortical thickness in that part of the brain, which is pretty amazing, pretty amazing. And from that part of the brain starts to come what we call wisdom. So this is now much more than just kind of knowing facts and whatever else. That medial prefrontal cortex is responsible for a lot of higher ordered thinking. It's responsible for, putting context to things. And it has a way of just putting relativity to things so that you don't overreact the way you normally would and the likes of that. So really, really powerful. It starts to self-organize into what I call this flowing wisdom and usness, authentic kindness. Now, just I say consider this, and I'll just give you a minute on this, but this is so cool. How many have noticed out in nature where you would be, either you scare up a bunch of birds or they're flying in the sky and a whole big flock of them and they seem to be attached by a string and just swoon and swoop and that? You've all seen that? Do you know that every natural biological system has that same process happening? It's called emergence. Look up emergence sometimes. What you're seeing there is a mass of, in this case, birds dedicated to the same goal of, flying or whatever. And when you get a critical mass of birds or termites or ants, no matter where they do the research, you get this increased order. It's the only way you can say it. There's an order that gets higher up, You get this connectedness. And if you've ever been a part of, any of you ever did an indigenous person's drumming circle? Any of you had a chance to do that? Well, you know where I'm going to go with this then. We just start to drum, and the leaders say, just go ahead and just do your thing. You just start to drum, right? No instructions. And within 10 or 12 minutes, you start saying, whoa, like this is sounding pretty good. Like no one's following anything, but you've just experienced emergence. That's what emergence is. You have just brought yourself into this higher order of being in the situation. So this is what happens in your life with mindfulness. You start to have an increased wisdom, sensitivity, order just coming into yourself. And it's some of this organizing that brings us to higher ordered behaviors, giving selflessly to other people, seeing needs before we even saw them, and then being so willing and wanting to help people. This is why people who practice these kinds of things end up being unconditionally compassionate and also have higher orders of personally satisfying lives. So that's the emergence piece. So one of my great teachers, Jack Kornfield, from a mindful center we can respond instead of react. Unconscious reactions create problems. Mindful responses bring peace. Whatever happens can be met then with wisdom and compassion. So here's what we have to learn, and we're just about to go into a practice session to do this. We have to be aware, mindful, intentional in the moment to know and realize that you are here right now. You're going to learn. You're experiencing thoughts and feelings as messages, not you. They're just like any other sense door, smell, touch, taste. They're not you. Allow thoughts and feelings to come and go and not drive and distort our subjective experiences. Because of mindlessness, we put these subjective spins on what's happening out here. And as a result, we often miss so much of what the real truth of this moment is. And share emotional self-regulation regardless of thought content. This is where I say to folks, and you heard me just touch on this last week, that I said we don't have to be feeling kind to be authentically kind. Kindness is just like this primordial messaging system to stay closer to the good people and away from the bad people. That's what feelings are. Feelings are not who we are. When we have authentic kindness, we just connect with them, as we talked about with emergence and the likes of that. We go far beyond just the feelings, because all of us in our profession and in our personal lives are going to be with people who are not likable, who are difficult, who are self-centered, and yet in these moments we want to first do no harm, and secondly, if we can help people to be better, we want to do that. That's some of what the big picture is about, right? People we support, whoever. And so we can do that authentically, not even if we're not even feeling it. There is a place that the heart opens to that just has its way of leading ourselves into higher ordered, if you will, emergence kinds of being in situations. So that's ensuring that the emotional self-regulation happens in spite of what we're feeling or thinking. And then to be unconditionally compassionate regardless of how we're feeling, that starts to happen. Of course, we have to practice, practice, practice. You're going to hear that from me every week. It's going to be a broken record. Practice, practice, practice. If you want to play Massey Hall, you got to play your guitar and practice for how long, whatever. So let's give you one final quote and do a little exercise. From Thomas Merton, he says, "People who are mindful are positive role models, not so much because they are admired by others, but because the skill of mindfulness makes it possible for them to admire everyone else." The great escape. I joined the ranks of a million others, guilty of terrible crimes. It just happened, I tell the judge, as I'm sentenced to do hard times. Paying the price more and more in dark and dingy cell. Alone I weep, the harm I cause, lost in this merciless hell. Don't know why after each vow, heart closes with no explain. Anger, lies, another betrayal. Why do I cause such pain? Time after time, no will to choose, to be free from PFP. 20 to life for so many thoughts, how to make them not be me. Then found painted on black cell walls, in blood from other inmates. Must kill driven, mindless self to walk out prison gates. Prison walls come crashing down as I awake to prohibit suffering's source, the asleep me, now freed, aware within it. I could talk about this critter called consciousness, and we have some really serious default programming around consciousness that the average person doesn't even know about. And so one is that we misperceive threats, our primitive predispositions and these filters and these brain primes get us overreacting to threats because we're not sufficiently conscious of really what's happening at the full realm of the situation. It causes us to overreact in times of perceived threat, overreact in less than what we're calling our A game or our best self. A default that we also have is that we're dissatisfied with having. This is a really incredible discovery in neuroscience. Do you know that when you are doing and getting, like working to get something, and in the process of it, that you have more reward neurotransmitters such as dopamine going off in your brain than when you actually have it. So when we have things, we are less satisfied. It's why we're likely such a materialistic population. And research clear, if you were to win $1 million tomorrow, a year from now you'd be about as happy as you were the day before you won the $1 million, or less happy, or 10 million. These are what we call default programs. Many of you have said, and many of our thousands of students that Adrienne and I have taught mindfulness to, will say something like the following: it's so hard. My mind is just going off a mile a minute in all different directions. I try to bring it back to focusing, but it seems to have a mind of its own. And when I hear that from my students, I rejoice. I am delighted. Why would a teacher be delighted with someone saying, I got a problem, I can't do it? Here's why. Because the first part of us getting a better handle on our consciousness, living a better life as we've just described, is knowing how serious a problem we are in not being sufficiently conscious. So when you are trying to apply mindfulness to your body sensations and to your thinking and to your feeling, and you get pulled into a raft of feelings or thoughts, get pulled in, you don't know you're there, you're struggling, and all of a sudden you catch yourself coming back. Oh yeah, I'm supposed to be watching that, not a part of the content. And every time that happens to you in your practice, I want you to say to yourself, oh my gosh, here is another confirmation of how vulnerable I am in life. Because when you have these moments, if you do a practice session for 15 minutes, you will likely have 30, 40, or 50 moments of being just pulled into that raging river of PFP brain. And you do this enough, and the first insight that comes to you is that you have very little say in what you're thinking. Just like when you're doing your mindfulness practice and you get pulled into it, that's happening every minute in your lives each day, but you don't know it. Because you're involved in a situation and you're saying things and you're feeling things and you think you're making choices and decisions. It's PFP that's doing most of that. PFP is driving most of your moments as your life unfolds in just an average day. Just like it's driving those moments of yada, yada, yada when you're doing a mindfulness practice. But the beauty of the mindfulness practice, even getting hijacked into that yada, 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 is that you get clearer and clearer and clearer about the problem. And this cannot be overstated in terms of its value. So I rejoice and I delight when I hear from someone, I'm finding out that my mind's got a mind of its own. I say, yes, we're going to teach you what to do about that. We're going to teach you what to do about that. And then learning how to do something about it, now we can get an audience, a student who's really ready to learn. And that's where the really beautiful part of this process comes from. So we have these tools. There's 4 basic tools that we're teaching you in mindfulness. And the first one is concentration. So to be able to concentrate, every time you apply yourself to doing a little practice session and your mind starts to get pulled off into yada, 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 and you get pulled into the content of whatever's happening, and you bring yourself back, you are growing neuron cells in a part of your brain that's responsible for remaining conscious and focused. And focusing and concentration are like 2 of the biggest natural birthright skills that we ever have. Imagine what your life would be like if you couldn't focus or concentrate. Couldn't pay attention to people, you would miss the subtleties of your enjoyments, you'd really just be at sea. And I got to share this with you. We are losing the natural ability to concentrate and focus at an alarming rate, maybe faster than we're losing trees in the rainforest. This is serious, because as we are being concentrated by our devices and our multisensory screens, we are losing the ability to concentrate. Because it's like putting your arm in a cast for 6 weeks and see what you get. You get atrophy of all those muscles. Every time you're concentrated by multimedia, color, voices and sounds, and every time you're doing that, it's like you're saying to your brain that concentrates, just go on leave for a few minutes here. I don't need you right now. because I'm being concentrated enough. And this is subtle but significant in how it's taking over lives. We're starting to lose the ability to concentrate and therefore to be able to listen to each other. As a parent, as a partner, as an adult kid, as a support professionals, we are losing at an alarming rate. So, what to do about that? Well, the more we practice, the greater likelihood we're going to have of developing the skills of concentration that we need. So, that's one big benefit that come from this. Now, the next we talk about in terms of a tool is something that we call sensory clarity. It just means this. We're helping you pay attention to your sense doors that are happening each moment. Like right now in each of you, you've got certain body sensations, likely that were different than when you're in your groups. Body sensations that are different than when you're laying under your blankets this morning before you get out of bed. You have all kinds of hundreds of different body sensations throughout the day. And some of these move us towards being our optimal self, and some of these move us towards not being our optimal self. So mindfulness teaches how to clarify what's happening in the body when it's happening. It's also teaching us how to be aware of what's happening in the thinking sense door, what thoughts we're having in the moment. So this tool is clarifying what's happening to thinking, knowing that we're having certain thoughts. Right now, you knowing that you're listening to me, that's an awareness of a thought process that's happening. And so this sensory clarity helps us to do that. And then finally, we're teaching you how to be clear around what feelings you're having. Every feeling that you have has a place, often originating even in the body. When you can put all these together in this acronym, we're talking BFIT mindfulness, which is the body sensations. Then the two ways we think. We've got these image thinking, right, forms of pictures in mind movies. We have the talk thinking, which is the words that are happening. And then we've got feelings. So we're teaching you sensory clarity on all of that. And when you can get clarity in the moment on what's happening with BFIT, you're not nearly as addicted or driven to be a victim of this PFP programming that you've been inherited, basically, that we've inherited. Now let me just share with you the seriousness of what we're talking about. I'm going to give you the best neuroscience that I've been able to get. I'm going to pull it together. I'm going to share with you. I'd like each of you, first of all, to do this little experiment with me. I'd like you to just put your hand on your desktop or your tabletop and look at it. I want you to look at it. In the next 5 seconds, I want you to raise your index finger. Do it when you're ready, but just raise your index finger. Just start whenever you're ready. Okay, so likely everyone has done that. Let me tell you what had to happen in order for you to actually see that finger raise. And this, it's actual, but it's a metaphor for your whole life. Every moment you are in your world, this is what's happening at that very moment. Right now, for example, the parts of your brain that were programmed over 1 million years ago that are responsible for your safety, security, survival, sex, and simplicity of everything you do, phobias, prejudices, and all that, they're demanding to be heard right now. Many of these were programmed into your brain over 1 million years ago, and they are demanding to have their place at this very moment. Next. Right now, the parts of your brain that have been programmed with, say, 1 to 100 years of cultural and societal brain priming directives are also demanding to be heard. So what you have been primed through, we've talked about this brain priming as a result of the community you've been raised in, the laws, the rules, the values, what looks good, what doesn't, all those kinds of norms, they are also demanding to be heard at this very moment. They do not leave you when you are in the middle of a moment of a decision or whatever. Right now, the parts of your brain that you inherited when you were conceived are demanding to be heard right now. You inherited all kinds of things from your gene pool. They right now are also demanding to be heard at this moment. Right now, the parts of your brain that were programmed or nurtured in the first 1 to 14 years of your life, we call them filters. Jung calls them complexes. They're called schemas. Remember we talked about those? Right now, they're demanding to be heard too. They're having a say of the action of this very moment of what you are doing and thinking. In addition, right now, any emotional or physical pain that you have, embarrassment, exclusion, anxiety, depression, guilt, disapproval, anything that you're experiencing is also demanding to be heard right now and influencing what you are doing. Right now, the parts of your brain that are governed by your GI system, your gut system, those infections, intolerances that we talked about, and other biomedical comorbidities that grew just days and months ago are also demanding to be heard right now. Because those things are just recently coming into your sphere of being influenced. And next, right now, the parts of your brain that developed over the last hours and days that are directing your nervous system, things like hormones, to increase or decrease sensitivity to certain stimuli, are demanding to be heard right now. Yeah. Getting near the end of it here, but listen to this list. Right now, the parts of your brain that are programmed to react to environmental conditions, people, circumstances, the temperature of the room you're in, who you're with, timelines you've got to go on, all those things that just happened minutes ago are still demanding to be heard too. In addition, right now, the parts of your brain that are programmed to react to sensory stimuli that happened just seconds ago, your sensory system, it's like every second it's been programmed to deal with whatever's coming into it through vision, through hearing, through taste, through sound, right? And right now, finally, the parts of your brain of your PFP nervous system, all that I've been talking about, which is the sum total of all previous influences and experiences that happened seconds, minutes, hours, days, years, and millennia before, all of that I've just described, just seconds ago, were converted into BFIT. They were converted into body sensations, feelings, and image and talk reactions just seconds ago. All of that. They now drive your thoughts, your feelings, and your behavior, directly dependent on your degree of mindfulness or mindlessness. And let me add one more. And right now, your brain's cognitive bias circuit breaker is trying very hard to shut you down from seriously considering what I've just said. It's trying to shut you down. Oh, this is too complicated. Oh, I can't understand this. This is because your brain's hard drive strongly prefers commands that are simple and can be processed within seconds. You see, the reason that we continue to struggle with our human predicament is because looking at what has gone before us and what is driving all this is too complex. And you can never get a handle on that. Here is the beauty of mindfulness. What we're saying, in spite of all of those things that are happening right now, in spite of all of that, if you just learn how to regulate body, feeling, image, and talk, you're going to bring your A game to this moment. In spite of what you've inherited from the gene pool, in spite of what put into your amygdala a million years ago, in spite of your filtering system, because it all gets converted into this relatively simple 4-part algorithm. And we can teach you how to manage that algorithm. And now let's go back to you raising your finger. You saw your finger raise because that behavior met all of your PFP algorithm. In other words, all of those conditions that have been brought to you through your inherited fundamental brain wiring from a million years ago, all the way up to a minute or two ago, it met the demands of that programming. So that finger got raised. Now, if you'd been in a functional MRI, something interesting would have shown. We would have seen that 1.4 seconds before you raised your finger, there were billions of neuron firings happening, and they were deciding if, when, and how your finger would get raised. Yeah. So the more conscious we are, the more the you who's listening to me right now is in charge of this process. But the average untrained person is only like mostly just semi-conscious. Like how we drive our car. We're someplace, but our mind's someplace else. Unless, of course, that police officer shows up behind us, and then we can see the potential. We've got to raise consciousness. What we're talking about with mindfulness is raising consciousness without being threatened by whatever, including police, I guess. So mindfulness then appears to regulate much of this PFP data by focusing on the BFIT delivery system. That's the key, right? All of this seems to come down eventually into body sensations, feelings, and image and talk. And yeah, there's other sense doors, smelling, touching, tasting, and all that, and seeing. But the main emphasis is coming out of the BFIT. So when we can process BFIT with, first of all, being aware of what's happening, in body sensations, image thinking, talk thinking, and feeling, and then simultaneously apply that allowingness or that subjective internal letting it be attitude to release muscle body tensions and to intend just a releasing of certain thought patterns and whatnot, then we get to play our A game. I guess to complete the metaphor, we get to raise our finger the way we want to raise our finger. Now, you notice I get excited about this stuff because the quality of one's life can be significantly impacted when we dedicate ourselves to doing what we have to do. So, let's just talk for a moment. We're going to talk more next week too, but just a moment about how you make a practice sustainable, which is the big question. So in any problem, I break it down to real simple. You got to determine, do you have a can't problem, aka you can't do it because you don't know how, or do you have a won't problem, as in you're not motivated to do it? Now, initially right now, because you're new students to mindfulness, there will be some of the can't issue. I would suggest to you, our experience is like it's maybe a 3-to-1 motivation versus the can't. So on the can't side, for now, we encourage you to do a couple of things. Go to our website, or any good website on this, and bring in an app that is going to guide you during your practice sessions. So get good guidance. Don't just rely on your memory when it's not quite there yet. So be guided by a good app, right? And by the way, a good app is not like taking like 5 minutes with nice music and almost going to sleep as if you're on a beach. They are not good apps. Trust me, they're not going to learn much with that. You're going to feel relaxed, but you can do that just trying to go to sleep. You see, a good workout with mindfulness should be like you've just come back from the gym. You've lifted some weights, you've worked at it, you got a sweat worked up. That's what it's going to take to break through all of these millions of things that I've just shared with you. So that's the first point. Learn how to do it better. Secondly, hang out with like-minded people. Adriana, through Center for Conscious Care, offers with no charge our Breathe Notice Now series, and we're giving you the notices and when to go to that. You're going to find like-minded people hang out there. So that's a really good place to kind of start to get with this as well. And read the things that we've given you as your third piece. Just follow the guidance we've been giving you. And the last maybe how-to, and we're going to give you a session in a moment here. Start small, but do it regularly every day. So that's just 2 or 3 of the how-tos. Now, the next part we want to talk to you about is the why-to, or the motivation. This is, for many people, a won't problem. They're not motivated. So to get motivated, I'm just going to give you one big one, and then we're going to do a little session here. Here's the one big one. Let's say you would answer, strongly agree to this next question. The question is this, or the statement is this. I care so much about the people in my life, the people I support, my parents, my partner, my kids. I care so much about them that I am dedicated to be the best that I can be so that I can be the best I can be for them. Now, if you really would say, strongly agree to that, then there's no doubt that you're going to want to learn how to be a mindful person. Because you know the research is clear. We gave it to you last week. You know, all of the just dozens of ways we grow new neuron cells in that medial prefrontal cortex, which gives us the ability to feel compassion, caring, cooperative, alive, intuitive. I mean, the research goes on, right? So you know the research is there, that if you do that, you're going to be a better person for your loved ones and the people who you support. So this is now, I've taken you into a really tricky little moment here. Because if you find yourself not practicing, in effect, you're saying one of two things. I don't buy the research, or I don't care enough about the people who are in my life to work to be the best for them. Now, I know that might put shivers through some of you, but please hear it gentle from my heart. I'm just trying to say to you, we've got something that can help you significantly, and the thousands of people we've trained are finding that the outcomes that they're getting from this are just as the research is saying. So in the time I have today, each time you're with me, I'm going to give you one of these little riffs, okay? Because that's my job. Hopefully that's been enough to bring you to paying a really solid attention to the next 10, 12 minutes when we're going to do a little sitting practice.